The little girl drew the same woman every single night before bed, dark skin, tired eyes, holding a red heart in her hands, and nobody understood why until the night she almost died. While billionaire CEO Kang Taejun begged specialists to save his only child, alarms exploded through the ICU because Mina's body had started rejecting blood faster than doctors could replace it. The hospital had one final option, an anonymous donor who had never missed a month in 2 years. Except this time, she legally wasn't supposed to donate again. Downstairs, Nova Kane leaned against a supply closet trying not to faint from exhaustion after a 16-hour shift when she heard nurses whisper that Mina probably wouldn't survive until sunrise. A minute later, the same invisible woman everyone ignored walked toward the blood bank with tears in her eyes, and nobody realized she might not walk back out. Welcome to Wonderpath Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The Hanseong Children's Medical Center was one of the most prestigious hospitals in all of Seoul. Its floors were polished to mirror shine, its lobbies smelled of white orchids, and its staff moved with the quiet, practiced efficiency of people who understood that wealth and suffering could occupy the same building without ever truly meeting. It had 47 floors, 3 private wings, and a pediatric ICU on the 11th that operated like a world unto itself. Bright lights, soft machine hums, and the particular silence of people trying not to hope too loudly. Nova Kane had worked the night shift on that floor for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She knew this because she had counted. Not out of obsession, but because counting things, shifts, hours, vials, steps between supply closets, was the only way she had learned to keep herself from unraveling completely. She was 23 years old, Afro-Korean by heritage, and stunning in the quiet way that people with no time to think about their own beauty often are. Dark caramel skin that caught the fluorescent light and turned it warm. Brown straight hair pulled back in a low bun every single night without exception. A face that still carried softness even after 16-hour shifts, full lips, dark eyes that missed nothing, cheekbones that looked like someone had taken their time. She was curvy and small and moved through the hospital corridors with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned early that being noticed was not always a gift. Her uniform was plain navy blue. Her ID badge was faded at the corners. Her shoes were the kind you bought for function, not comfort, and she had long stopped caring about the difference. By the time most of Seoul had fallen asleep, Nova was mopping floors, restocking supply carts, and quietly doing the work that kept the 11th floor running. The kind of work that nobody photographed, nobody applauded, and nobody remembered in the morning. The first time she had ever really noticed Kang Mina, the little girl had been sitting up in her hospital bed at 2 in the morning with a sketch pad balanced on her knees, drawing with the focused intensity of someone who had somewhere very important to be inside her own imagination. Nova had been wiping down the corridor window just outside room 1107 when she'd caught the movement through the glass. A small hand. A crayon. Dark, careful strokes. She had knocked softly before entering to check the equipment. Mina had looked up without fear. 8 years old, frail enough that you wanted to be careful near her, but with eyes that were enormous and ancient and completely unbothered by the tubes in her arm or the machines beside her bed. "You work at night," Mina had said. Not a question, an observation. The way children sometimes said things that adults would spend weeks tiptoeing around. "I do," Nova had answered. "Aren't you lonely?" Nova had thought about it honestly. "Sometimes, are you?" Mina had considered this with the gravity of a small philosopher. "Yes, but it's better when you're here, you smell like lemons." It was the cleaning solution. But Nova had smiled anyway, and something in her chest had shifted, quiet and permanent, like a door opening into a room she hadn't known existed. After that, she checked on Mina every single night. She told her stories about Lagos rainstorms during the wet season, about her grandmother's jollof rice that smelled like it could cure loneliness, about London rooftops, and the particular way the Thames looked on cold mornings when the whole city was still asleep. Mina listened with her whole body, leaning forward, knees pulled to her chest, sketchpad forgotten in her lap. She started calling Nova Miss Night Sky. Nova never corrected her. 3 weeks after their first conversation, Mina had pressed a folded drawing into Nova's hand before she left for the morning. Nova had opened it in the elevator. It was a woman with dark skin and tired eyes, holding a red heart in both hands. Above it, in careful 8-year-old handwriting, "The lady who stays." Nova had stood in that elevator until the doors opened and closed twice before she finally moved. She did not cry. She had learned not to. But she folded that drawing and put it in her left breast pocket, and it stayed there for a very long time. Kang Taejun arrived at Hanseong Children's Medical Center every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 7 in the morning. He was 25 years old, which most people found impossible to believe until they saw him in person and understood immediately that age was irrelevant when presence was that absolute. Brown hair, short and clean. Brown eyes that cataloged everything in a room before most people had finished walking through the door. A jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to carry the weight of decisions that would make other men fold. He was the youngest head of the Kang Syndicate in 3 generations, a fact that his enemies had underestimated exactly once before learning not to repeat the mistake. Publicly, he was the founder and CEO of Nexera Biotech, a legitimate pharmaceutical empire that had made him a billionaire before his 24th birthday. His face appeared on magazine covers. He gave speeches at medical conferences. He donated to children's hospitals with the particular generosity of someone who understood, deeply and personally, what it meant to need one. Privately, he ran something considerably more complicated. The people who worked for him were loyal the way that tides were loyal to the moon, not because they had to be, but because the alternative had never once occurred to them. He was fair in the way that mattered and ruthless in the way that was necessary, and the line between those two things was the only philosophy he had ever operated by. But when he walked into room 1107 and his daughter's face lit up the way it did, that enormous, unguarded light that 8-year-olds produced without knowing it was rare, every single thing he was outside that room became completely irrelevant. He was her father first. Everything else was secondary. Mina had autoimmune marrow disease. It had been diagnosed when she was 6, the year after her mother died, and Taejun had handled it the way he handled everything, by throwing every resource he possessed at it until it yielded. Specialists from 7 countries, experimental treatments, research grants, a private laboratory in Gangnam running blood disorder trials around the clock. None of it had been enough to fix it. The best they had managed was management, regular transfusions of B-negative blood that kept Mina stable, kept her coloring warm and her drawings full of color, and her voice strong enough to argue with her nurses about which cartoons she was allowed to watch after lights out. She needed those transfusions every month. Without them, she faded fast. What Taejun did not know, what Dr. Seo Yejin had protected behind a wall of medical ethics and donor anonymity law for almost 2 years, was where that blood came from. Nova had discovered her blood type was B-negative at 17, during a routine health screening at her secondary school in Lagos. The nurse had made a small sound of interest, explained it was rare, and told her she should consider donating regularly. She had filed the information away the way teenagers filed away things that seemed adult and far off. It wasn't until she was 19, sitting in a donor clinic in London because her father had just had a stroke, and she had learned that blood banks ran low, that she actually gave blood for the first time. The feeling afterward had been difficult to describe. Not physical, something underneath that. Like she had put something true about herself into the world without anyone being able to take credit for it or diminish it. She had kept donating after that. Through university, through her father's recovery, through dropping out of her biomedical engineering program when the bills became too enormous to manage and London became impossible, through the decision to move to Seoul, where a hospital recruitment program offered housing and a salary that, while not impressive by any objective standard, was more than she had. When she started working at Hanseong and heard through Dr. Seo, who had noticed her blood type on her intake paperwork and approached her quietly, carefully after 2 months, that there was a pediatric patient with a rare type who had been struggling with inconsistent donor supply, Nova had agreed without hesitation. She had never asked the patient's name. Dr. Seo had never offered it. That was the arrangement, and Nova found a particular piece in that arrangement. She was not doing it to be known. She was doing it because a child needed blood and she had blood, and the math of that was perfectly simple. Every month, after her night shift ended, she walked to the donor unit on the 3rd floor. She sat in the chair. She gave what she had to give. She went home to her small apartment in Mapogu, ate whatever she could put together from what was in her refrigerator, and slept for 7 hours before starting again. She had done this for 23 consecutive months. Nobody in the hospital, except Dr. Seo, knew. The night everything changed began like most nights on the 11th floor, quietly. Nova had started her shift at 11, had restocked 3 supply carts, cleaned 2 rooms, helped a night nurse with a patient who was too frightened to sleep, and was working her way down the east corridor when the alarms went off in room 1107. It was the kind of alarm that didn't need explaining. The sound itself communicated everything. She pressed herself against the wall as 3 nurses sprinted past, then a 4th, then Dr. Seo herself, still pulling on her coat, face arranged into the particular controlled calm of someone managing panic from the inside. Nova waited. She watched the door. She did what she always did, which was stay out of the way while other people did the work they were trained to do, and she tried not to let herself feel too much about the small girl on the other side of that door who smelled like lavender soap, and had once told her that stars were just holes where the light got through. 20 minutes later, she heard it. 2 nurses, young, exhausted, standing in the corridor not 10 feet from where Nova was cleaning a storage cabinet. They were talking in low voices, Korean quick and worried, but Nova's Korean was fluent enough now that she caught every word. Count is collapsing. Hemoglobin's nowhere near stable. There's no compatible blood anywhere in Seoul. They checked Busan. Everywhere. There's one donor, the anonymous one, but she donated 3 weeks ago. It's too soon. They can't ask her. Then what do they do? A silence that said everything. Nova set down the cloth she was holding. Her hands were very still. She looked at the fresh bandage on the inside of her left arm, small and white against her caramel skin from 3 weeks ago. She thought about the drawing in her breast pocket. The lady who stays. She thought about Mina at 2 in the morning, knees pulled to her chest, asking if she was lonely. She walked to the elevator and pressed 3. The blood donor unit was quiet at that hour. One technician on duty, a man named Park who had processed Nova's donations for nearly 2 years and who had always been gentle and professional and who now looked up when she walked in and immediately understood from her face why she was there. Miss Kane. His voice was careful. You were just here. I know. It's too soon. Medically, I know. She sat down in the chair, rolled up her sleeve. Tell me what the risks are and then tell me how long the prep takes, he told her. She listened to all of it without looking away, then she said, How long for Mina? His expression answered before his words did. She was already tying off the tourniquet. She might not make it until sunrise, he said quietly. Then let's not waste time. Upstairs, Kang Taejun was doing the only thing he had never mastered, which was nothing. He stood outside room 1107 with his hands in his pockets, and his jaw locked, and his entire body coiled with a helplessness so foreign to him that he didn't have a name for it. He had people who solved problems. He had resources that bent the architecture of impossible situations. He had made men who ran entire criminal organizations reconsider their positions simply by entering a room. He had nothing here. Dr. Seo had emerged 15 minutes ago and told him, with the particular compassion of someone who had learned to deliver terrible information with human warmth, that Mina's hemoglobin was dangerously low, that the compatible blood supply had been exhausted, and that they were pursuing every option available. What options? He had asked. She had hesitated in a way that told him everything. There is one donor, she had said finally. Anonymous, but the timing isn't safe. We cannot compel, find a way, Mr. Kang. Her voice was firm and kind in equal measure. Human donors cannot be compelled, that is not how this works. He had stared at her for a long time. She had not looked away. He had turned back to the window and stood there doing nothing, which was the hardest thing he had ever done. Downstairs, Nova was trembling, not from fear. From the particular physical response of a body that had already been asked to do something difficult 3 weeks ago, and was being asked to do it again before it had finished rebuilding. Her hands shook slightly in her lap. Her vision had a faint, precarious quality at the edges, like a photograph slightly overexposed. Park was monitoring her the entire time, speaking quietly, watching her blood pressure on the screen beside him. You need to tell me if you feel. I'm fine. Miss Kane, I will tell you, she said, with the particular quiet authority of someone who had decided. I promise I will tell you. She thought about her Aunt Gloria, back in Itaewon, whose heart was getting worse. She thought about the hospital bills she had paid last week and the ones due next month. She thought about the biomedical engineering textbooks she still kept in a box under her bed, even though she had no time to open them anymore, because she couldn't bring herself to throw them away. She thought about none of that, actually. She thought about Mina. She stayed in the chair. The blood reached the 11th floor at 3:47 a.m. DRCO processed the transfusion herself, moving with a quiet urgency that the night nurses had learned to read as, "This matters, pay attention, stay close." Taejun stood in the corridor. He watched through the window. He did not move for 41 minutes. And then slowly, like dawn arriving before you were ready for it, Mina's color began to return. The machines steadied. The numbers climbed. The particular alarm that had been running for hours went quiet with a finality that made every person in that room exhale at exactly the same moment. Taejun pressed one hand against the glass and dropped his forehead to meet it, and for a long moment the most feared man in Seoul simply breathed. He found Dr. Seo in the hallway at 5 in the morning. "Donor," he said. No preamble, no softening. His voice was controlled in the way that things under extreme pressure become controlled, compressed, precise. "I need to know who it is. Mr. Kang, name your price, whatever the hospital needs, whatever she needs." He caught himself, revised. "Whoever it is, doctor." Seo looked at him for a long moment. There was no contempt in her expression, which was the thing that made what she said next land harder than it might have otherwise. "You can fund laboratories, Mr. Kang," she said. "You can build wings and endow research chairs and donate more money than most countries see in a decade. But human kindness is not something you purchase." The donor was under no obligation to come back tonight. The timing was medically inadvisable. She came anyway. She paused. "I will not give you her name." He said nothing for a very long time. "Is she all right?" he finally asked. Dr. Seo's expression shifted, barely perceptibly. "She will be." He nodded once and walked back to Mina's room. The following morning, Nova slept until 2 in the afternoon, which was unprecedented. When she woke, her left arm ached from shoulder to elbow, her vision was fine, and her body had the specific depleted quality of something that had been generous past its limit. She ate 3 boiled eggs and drank 2 glasses of water and lay back down for another hour, staring at the ceiling. Her phone had 3 missed calls from Gloria and 1 text from Dr. Seo that said only, "She's stable. Thank you." "Please rest today." She put the phone face down and closed her eyes. She did not feel heroic. She never did. She felt tired and fond and quietly certain that she had done the correct thing, which was a different feeling entirely, and in her experience, the better one. 3 days later, Taejun was still at the hospital. He had cleared his schedule in the way that only people with armies of assistants could, a series of quiet rearrangements that his office handled without comment because his staff understood, had always understood, that Mina changed every equation. He was sitting with her the evening of the 4th day when she showed him the drawing she'd been working on. It was the same woman she always drew. Dark skin, tired eyes, holding something red. "Who is that?" he asked, because he had asked before but never gotten an answer that satisfied him. Mina considered this with her usual gravity. "Miss Night Sky," she said. "Who is she?" "She tells me stories and she smells like lemons." Mina tilted her head. "And she comes every night even when she's really, really tired. You can tell because her eyes look like they hurt." She touched the drawing with 1 small finger. "But she always comes anyway." Taejun looked at the drawing for a long time. He heard it by accident. That was the thing that struck him later, that for all the resources he possessed, for all the information networks and the loyal people and the power he had spent years accumulating, the truth came to him the way truth often did. Sideways, when he wasn't looking, from 2 exhausted nurses talking in a corridor they thought was empty. He had been walking back from the vending machine at the end of the East Hall, too tired to take the elevator to the private lounge his family used. 2 nurses were at the station around the corner, their voices low and not quite low enough. Heard Park in the donor unit talking about it. "She donated 3 weeks ago and came back anyway." That's not safe." "I know, but the child would have died and she just showed up, alone, in the middle of the night." "Which one is she?" "The donor," a pause. "Nova, the night sanitation tech, works the 11th floor." Taejun stopped walking. The vending machine drink in his hand was cold. He did not notice. He stood in that corridor for a very long time. The elevator was empty when he got on. It was not empty when it stopped at the 7th floor. Nova stepped in holding 2 supply bags and a mop handle propped against her shoulder, her ID badge catching the light. She was wearing the Navy uniform. Her hair was up. She had the particular alertness of someone 3 hours into a shift, present, efficient, not wasting energy on anything that didn't need it. She glanced at him the way hospital staff glanced at powerful visitors. Polite acknowledgement, no further expectation. He had seen her before, he realized. Dozens of times. Passing in corridors, working in rooms he walked by, moving through the hospital with that practiced quiet. He had never once actually looked at her. He looked now. The cracked edges of her gloves. The swelling around her left arm, faint but visible beneath the rolled sleeve, bandage white against her skin. The shadows under her eyes that were not the ordinary shadows of a night shift but something deeper, earned over months. The particular way she carried herself, not beaten down, nothing like that, but weighted. Like someone who had been quietly holding something heavy for a very long time and had simply stopped noticing the effort. She didn't look at him again. She watched the floor numbers. The elevator was silent. He wanted to say something. He had built an empire on the ability to say the right thing at the right moment, to read rooms and respond with precision, and he stood there with nothing. No words. No precision. Just the understanding, arriving with the force of something he should have known long before now, that the person keeping his daughter alive had been standing this close to him for 2 years while he looked through her like she was part of the architecture. The elevator reached the 11th floor. Nova stepped out first, balanced the supply bags, and walked away down the corridor without looking back. The doors closed. Taejun stood alone in the elevator as it descended and felt, for the second time in 4 days, completely and entirely helpless. A week later, he started noticing everything. It was involuntary, the way that things you haven't been able to unsee have a way of becoming permanent. He noticed which rooms she worked and in what order. He noticed that she always checked on patients who were awake even when it wasn't technically her job. A hand on a shoulder. A few words. Something small and real offered to someone who was frightened and alone in the dark. He noticed that the nurses who worked alongside her moved more easily when she was on shift, that the floor had a different quality, calmer, more humane, and that this quality was not an accident. He noticed the vending machine crackers she ate instead of actual food, because she was clearly working through the cafeteria hours without stopping. He noticed the way she sometimes stood in the corridor for just a moment between tasks, eyes closed, head slightly back, like someone gathering themselves, and then opened her eyes and kept going. He did not approach her. He wasn't sure what he would say, and Taejun Kang had a strict policy against opening his mouth without knowing exactly how a sentence would land. But he started leaving things. It began with the vending machine. He arranged, through the hospital administrator, for Nova's staff ID to have a credit loaded onto it, anonymous, untraceable, framed as an employee wellness initiative. She would have no way of knowing it was him. Then he spoke to the night shift coordinator about the supply cart assignments, because he had noticed that Nova was consistently assigned the heaviest and most remote supply runs, which made no operational sense. The assignments were redistributed. He was not supposed to be doing any of this. He was a visitor, a donor, a powerful man who had no authority over staffing or logistics. He did it anyway, Dr. Seo noticed. She found him reviewing the hospital's night staff scheduling data, which he absolutely should not have had access to on a tablet in the family lounge, and said nothing for a moment, which was its own form of speech. Mr. Kang, she said finally. Dr. Seo. There's something specific you need from the night operations team. He looked up. His expression was entirely neutral. I'm reviewing the hospital's staffing efficiency. As a major donor, I have a board-level interest in operational quality. Of course. She sat down across from him. And this interest is completely unrelated to the fact that you've been on this floor every night for 2 weeks. He said nothing. She studied him for a long moment with the expression of someone who had seen a great many things in her career and was now adding this one to the list. She doesn't know you know, Dr. Seo said. No, she cannot know it came from you. If she thinks you're trying to pay her back, I'm aware. His voice was flat. I'm not trying to pay her back. You can't pay someone back for that. He paused. I'm just trying to make sure she can eat a real meal. Dr. Seo was quiet for a moment. She's extraordinary, she said. Not warmly, but factually, the way you stated something that was simply true, in ways that have nothing to do with her blood type. Taejun looked back at the tablet. I know. He did not mean to be in the corridor when she finished her shift that night, or maybe he did. He had stopped being entirely honest with himself about the distinction. It was 4:30 in the morning, and the east corridor was empty, and Nova came around the corner with her coat over one arm, bag on her shoulder, moving toward the elevator with her head slightly down. She looked up when she heard him. They were maybe 10 feet apart. For a moment, neither of them moved. He had thought about this, had run various versions of it through his mind, which was something he did with everything, assessed, prepared, controlled the variables. He had nothing prepared for the actual experience of her standing there looking at him with those dark, exhausted eyes that were somehow completely direct without being demanding. "I wanted to thank you," he said. She was very still. "For what?" "For my daughter." He let the words be plain. He didn't perform anything around them. "I know what you did. I know when you did it and what it cost you." He paused. "I know you weren't supposed to come back that soon." Expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not fear, something else, a careful, private assessment. "Doctor, CO, didn't tell me. I overheard nurses." He held her gaze. "The anonymity is still yours. That hasn't changed. I just needed you to know that I know and that He stopped. "That I'm sorry." She watched him. "For what?" "For 2 years of walking past you." Words landed between them in the empty corridor and stayed there. Nova shifted her bag on her shoulder. Her expression was unreadable in the specific way that people who were feeling something precise and real sometimes became unreadable, not because they were hiding it, but because they hadn't decided yet what to do with it. "She's a good kid," Nova said finally. Her voice was quiet. "She fought hard that night." He nodded. His throat was doing something he didn't have complete control over. "She drew you." "For months, I didn't know it was you." Nova's face changed. Barely. A small, involuntary something around her eyes. She didn't say anything for a moment. "I should get home," she said. "My shift, I know, I'm sorry." He stepped back, giving her the corridor. "Ms. Kane," she paused. "Take care of yourself," he said. "If you won't let me just, please." She looked at him for a long moment that felt like a conversation neither of them had words for yet. Then she walked to the elevator and was gone. He thought about her constantly after that. This was not something Taejun was accustomed to. He was a person who compartmentalized with the efficiency of someone whose survival had historically depended on it, each part of his life in its correct place, separated by walls that held. His daughter in one room, his empire in another. The complicated darkness of the world, he actually ran behind a third door that he kept locked and did not think about outside of the hours it required. Nova Kane did not stay in a compartment. She moved through all of them. He caught himself thinking about her at board meetings, during calls with people who ran significant portions of Southeast Asian shipping logistics, at Mina's beside while Mina was sleeping. The particular way she had said she fought hard that night, like Mina was someone she knew, someone she had been paying attention to, not a patient but a person. He thought about the worn edges of her gloves. He thought about the drawing. He thought, with a specificity that surprised him, about the sound of her voice in that corridor. Low, controlled, unimpressed by him in a way that no one ever was, not because she was performing indifference, but because she genuinely, completely did not need anything from him. He was used to people wanting something. Every person in his life wanted something, and he was used to that and had organized his entire existence around managing it. Nova wanted nothing. He didn't know what to do with that. 2 weeks later, he showed up at the end of her shift again, not the corridor this time. The parking structure where she waited for the night staff bus every morning because she didn't have a car. It was raining, not heavily but persistently, the kind of soul rain that didn't bother announcing itself but simply arrived and settled in. He was under the shelter when she came out. She stopped. "Mr. Kang, there's a car." He nodded toward the black vehicle idling at the structure exit. "It will take you wherever you need to go, and it will come every morning." She looked at the car, looked at him. "I take the bus. The bus stop is 6 blocks from here. I know where it is. It's raining. I have an umbrella." She pulled it from her bag to demonstrate. It was a small, slightly bent umbrella that had clearly been to war. He looked at the umbrella. She watched him look at it. "MS. Kane, Nova," she said. Then seemed to catch herself, like she hadn't planned to say that. Something happened in his chest. Small and definitive. "Nova," he said. Her name and his voice sounded different than he expected. Or maybe it sounded exactly as he'd expected, and that was the problem. "Let me do this." "Why?" "Because you kept my daughter alive for 2 years and nearly killed yourself doing it, and I've been standing in the same building and I didn't even know your name." "Because I'd like to." She studied him in the way she studied everything, completely, unhurriedly, with that particular quality of attention that he was beginning to understand was not reserve but precision. She saw things accurately and she didn't rush the seeing. "One ride," she said. He nodded. He didn't push it. He held the umbrella over her while she walked to the car, then stood in the rain and watched it drive away. He was soaked by the time he got back to his own vehicle. He didn't particularly notice. The car was there the next morning, and the one after that. Nova took it both times without comment. The driver was a quiet man named Lee who said exactly nothing beyond confirmation of her destination, which she appreciated. On the third morning, there was a coffee in the cup holder. Not vending machine coffee. Actual coffee, the kind from the place in Mapogu that she had walked past every morning for a year and never gone into because it was not the kind of place where you went alone on a sanitation technician's salary. Her order, which she had never told anyone, was written on the cup in Hangul. Dark roast, oat milk, 1 sugar. She stared at it for a long moment. She thought about being annoyed. She genuinely considered it. She drank it on the way home. It was perfect. She did not tell him it was perfect, but she did not tell him to stop. Over the following 2 weeks, things kept appearing. A new pair of hospital-grade compression gloves in her locker with no note. The vending machine on the 11th floor was restocked with actual food, not crackers and stale chips, but proper energy bars, fruit, things that constituted nutrition. The supply card assignments that had been punishing her with extra distance were quietly corrected. None of it had a name on it. None of it could be definitively traced, but she was not unintelligent. She knew. She should have been more bothered by it than she was. She had spent 2 years being invisible in that hospital, and the experience of being suddenly, specifically seen by someone like Taejun Kang, was she did not have a clean word for it. Unsettling in a way that was adjacent to warmth. Like standing too close to something that was both a fire and a heat source, and not being entirely sure which quality was more dangerous. She kept her distance professionally. He visited Mina on his usual schedule. They passed in corridors. They exchanged brief nods, occasionally brief words. He never pushed. He never demanded. He was simply, persistently there at exactly the distance she hadn't told him was acceptable, which suggested he was paying very close attention to where that distance was. This was, she understood, probably the most dangerous thing about him. Mina was discharged 5 weeks after the crisis. Her hemoglobin was stable. Her counts were the best they'd been in 14 months. Dr. Seo was cautiously optimistic in the measured, careful way of someone who had been in this field long enough to know that optimism required qualification. But the qualified version was still good. Nova heard about the discharge on her shift the morning after. She went to room 1107 to clean it for the next patient and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the empty bed, the cleared nightstand, the window that Mina had liked to press her forehead against when the city was lit up below. There was something on the nightstand that the cleaning staff had missed. A folded piece of paper. Nova opened it. It was a drawing. Mina's style, careful strokes, enormous intention, the particular boldness of a child who drew like the paper was listening. 2 figures. One tall, dark-skinned, with tired eyes and a warm expression. One small, holding the tall one's hand, written underneath in careful Hangul and then in English. Miss Night Sky and me forever. Come visit. A phone number was written at the bottom in adult handwriting that was not Mina's. Nova folded the drawing and put it in her left breast pocket, next to the first one. She stood there for a while longer. Then she finished cleaning the room. She should not have called the number. She called it 3 days later at 7 in the morning, sitting on her apartment floor with her back against the couch because she was too tired to sit upright, and she told herself she was calling to thank Mina and that it had nothing to do with anything else. He answered on the second ring. Nova. He said her name the same way he'd said it in the parking structure, like it was something he'd been holding carefully. She had been trying not to think about that. Drawing, she said. I wanted to say thank you. Tell her it's beautiful. A pause, not uncomfortable. She'll want to tell you herself. She's been asking about you. Shouldn't, she's 8 and she loves you. I've stopped arguing with her about what she should and shouldn't do. There was something in his voice, almost warmth, almost. I found it's ineffective. Nova laughed before she could stop herself. It was a short, quiet laugh but real silence. Are you? He asked, simply. Fine, she paused. Better, the arm is fine. That's not exactly what he stopped. Okay, good, I'm glad. He paused. Mina wants to bring you a gift. She made something. I told her you might be busy. Tell her she stopped, started again. I'm working Thursday night, but I have a few hours Thursday morning. Tell her, a beat. She'll be very pleased with herself. Tell her she should be. Nova leaned her head back against the couch. Outside her window, Seoul was doing its morning thing, busy and bright and indifferent. Mr. Kang Taejun. She didn't use it, not yet. Thank you for the car and the rest of it. She kept her voice level. I know it was you. A long pause. I know you know, he said. Is that something in his voice shifted, careful? Does it make you uncomfortable? She thought about it honestly because he seemed like the kind of person who could tell the difference between a real answer and a managed one. A little, she said, but not no, it's fine. She paused. Thank you. You don't have to thank me for any of it. His voice was quiet and completely direct. Nova, none of it touches what you did. She had no answer to that. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he agreed. She ended the call and sat there for a while, phone in her hand, looking at nothing. Thursday arrived the way things arrived that you'd been pretending not to think about suddenly and with great presence. Mina came with her father and a painted wooden box that she had decorated herself with careful swirls of blue and gold, and what appeared to be an attempt at ocean waves. Inside the box, a small handmade book, illustrated. Every page a story Nova had told her during night rounds, drawn in Mina's bold, enormous style. Nova sat on the couch in her apartment and turned each page slowly, while Mina stood beside her, and narrated every illustration with the authority of someone who knew exactly what they'd made and why. Taejun sat across from them in the single chair she owned, which he occupied with the particular discomfort of a tall, broad-shouldered man in a chair not designed for either of those qualities, and watched his daughter's face while Mina talked, and did not say anything, and Nova was very careful not to look at him too much. Later, after tea and the coconut biscuits she'd bought specifically and tried to be casual about, Mina fell asleep on the couch with the unself-consciousness of a child who considered every soft surface an option. They sat in silence for a moment. She's happy, Nova said quietly. Meaning, look at her. Meaning she's going to be okay. Because of you. His voice was low, keeping the quiet. He was watching Mina, not her. Because she's strong. Nova looked at the small book in her hands. And because she had someone fighting for her. He looked at her then. She felt it before she turned. That quality of attention she had been trying to describe to herself for weeks, total, specific, the kind that didn't scan you but actually landed. Like he was looking at exactly her, the actual her, and finding something there that surprised him and that he was not going to pretend didn't. She looked back. The silence was not empty. It was the opposite of empty. I should wake her up, she said. She needs dinner. He didn't move for a moment. Nova, I'd like to take you to dinner. Flat, direct, no performance. Not as thanks, not as he paused, finding the right words. Because I'd like to. She looked at him for a long time. I work nights, she said. I know. My schedule is, I know. She turned back to Mina. Ask me again, she said. Another day, she heard him exhale almost inaudibly. Okay, he asked again 8 days later. Dinner was in a small restaurant in Mapogu, walking distance from her apartment, nothing like the kind of place he clearly frequented. She had chosen it deliberately. He had agreed without asking for an alternative, which she noted. It was comfortable in a way she hadn't prepared for. He was attentive without being claustrophobic. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers, not in the way of someone gathering information, but in the way of someone genuinely interested in what she'd say next. She told him about Lagos and London and the biomedical engineering textbooks under her bed, and he told her about Mina's obsession with marine biology and the fish tank they were building in the Kang penthouse, and somewhere between the first round of drinks and the second course, she laughed 3 times, genuinely, and did not have to manage any of it. She noticed him watching her when he thought she wasn't watching. She noticed that his jaw tightened briefly when a man at the bar looked at her for a beat too long, then looked away immediately when Taejun turned his head. Barely anything. Just a fractional shift of attention, a small, involuntary claim. She filed that away. Dinner became another dinner. Then a walk through Mapogu on an afternoon when she was off. Then coffee, once, early in the morning before her shift began, which meant he had gotten up before dawn to make that work, and she chose not to calculate what that meant. He showed up to the hospital sometimes during Mina's check-ins and simply walked the floor with her for part of her shift, not interfering, not changing anything, just walking alongside her in the empty corridors at 2 in the morning the way you walked alongside someone you'd decided to make time for. He bought her textbooks. Not the ones she had, the updated editions, the current year. They appeared on her doorstep in a box with no note, but the handwriting on the shipping label was meticulous and left-leaning in a way she'd started recognizing. She propped one against her pillow and read for 3 hours one morning instead of sleeping, which was the most like herself she'd felt in 3 years. She texted him, "You bought me textbooks." He replied after 12 minutes, "You were halfway through a biomedical engineering degree." The books were overdue. She stared at the message for a while. "Thank you," she sent back. He replied, "Come have dinner with me this week. You already owe me dinner this week. Then come have it." She did. The jealousy incident was not small. She had known, in the way that you knew things you weren't quite examining directly, that Taejun had a particular quality around her that was not entirely casual. A specific attentiveness that tracked her in rooms. An awareness of where she was, and who was near her that he managed with the practiced control of someone who'd been managing internal states under observation for years. She had not examined it directly, because she was not sure she was ready for what she'd find. The night of Dr. Seo's hospital staff appreciation dinner changed that. Nova had been invited as part of the night shift team, a genuine inclusion, Dr. Seo's doing, and she'd attended in a dress she'd bought second-hand that fit her in a way that was admittedly not subtle. Dark green. Simple. She'd left her hair down for the first time in months and had put on the small gold earrings that Gloria had given her before everything got difficult. Taejun was there in a different capacity, board member, major donor, present because Mina's recovery had made him more visibly invested in the hospital's culture. Their presence in the same room was not arranged. It simply happened. She was at the bar waiting for a drink when Dr. Park Jae-hoon, a young, genuinely charming attending physician who had always been respectful and slightly too friendly, appeared beside her and asked if she'd been enjoying the evening. And they had the kind of easy conversation that Nova mostly managed to avoid having with attractive men at events because it created situations. She was aware, without turning, that Taejun was across the room. She could feel it. Ji-hoon laughed at something she said and touched her arm briefly, the automatic social contact of someone who was comfortable and wanted her to know it, and she looked across the room. Taejun's expression was completely still. He was listening to whatever the hospital administrator was saying to him. His attention appeared to be entirely on the conversation. But his glass was completely motionless in his hand, and the muscle in his jaw was doing something that was barely visible and absolutely unmistakable. She turned back to Ji-hoon and wrapped up the conversation politely, and when she next glanced across the room, Taejun was still talking to the administrator, but his eyes had found her, just for a second, and the look in them was not anger. It was something more careful than anger. Something more controlled and therefore more dangerous. She felt it in her sternum. He found her near the end of the evening when the room had thinned. He handed her a glass of water which she had needed for an hour and hadn't gotten around to getting, and stood beside her, not in front of her, watching the room. "Physician," he said, conversational, controlled. "Ji-hoon!" "He's very nice." She said deliberately, a pause. "I know. He's excellent at his work." Another pause. "He was also looking at you like you were a problem he'd like to solve." She didn't turn. "And that bothers you." He said it too precisely to be entirely true. "I just found it notable." Nova pressed her lips together against something that was threatening to be a smile. Taejun. It was the first time she'd used his name. She heard him register it, a small, involuntary stillness. "I'm aware of who's looking at me," she said. "And I'm aware of who I'd like to look back at." Room continued around them, noise and light and the general business of other people's evenings. She heard him exhale. Nova. Her name in his voice, low and private and entirely without the controlled distance he usually maintained. He stopped, tried again. "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "At not being where you are." He said it simply, like a thing he'd stopped fighting. "At not thinking about you." "At letting someone else stand close to you without..." He stopped again. "I'm working on it." She turned then and looked at him fully. He looked back. No performance, no management, no careful architecture. Just him standing there being the most honest she'd seen him, which was saying something because he was not generally dishonest, just protected. "You don't have to work on it," she said quietly. "But you do have to tell me. I'm not going to guess." "I'm telling you now. Then I hear you." They stood there in the noise and the light, close enough that she could see the exact brown of his eyes, and neither of them moved, and the world continued around them like it was doing them the courtesy of looking away. 2 nights later, her aunt collapsed. Nova got the call at 1:17 a.m., 3 hours into her shift. It was Gloria's neighbor. a kind woman named Mrs. O who had Nova's number for exactly these situations. And her voice was calm in the particular way that people were calm when they were telling you something they knew would not be received calmly. Gloria was in the Idiwan cardiac unit. She was stable. But the episode had been severe, and the doctor on call had said things that Mrs. O relayed carefully, and Nova stood in the east corridor of the 11th floor and absorbed every word without moving. She arranged coverage for the rest of her shift, changed out of her uniform, was in a taxi within 20 minutes. She did not call Taejun. She didn't need to. She didn't want to. Gloria was hers, her responsibility, her love, her last family, the woman who had raised her after her parents died and who had aging lungs and an aging heart and no health insurance she hadn't paid for herself. Gloria was awake when Nova arrived, which was both a relief and painful in its own way, because Gloria awake meant Gloria talking, and Gloria talking meant Nova having to hold her expression steady while she heard about how the chest pain had started and how afraid Gloria had been and how she'd thought. "I thought this was it, baby," Gloria said, in the Jamaican-tinged accent she'd kept through decades of London and Seoul. "I thought, who's going to look after my Nova?" "I look after myself," Nova said. Gloria looked at her with the specific expression of someone who had been seeing through people they loved for decades. "Who are you wearing gold earrings for?" Nova glanced down. She'd still had them in. "No one." Gloria closed her eyes. "Tired now, but come back tomorrow. And bring me that horrible hospital pudding because I've been thinking about it." Nova sat with her until she slept. She was in the hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m, not eating, just sitting with bad coffee when she looked up and he was there. She stared. He sat down across from her. He was not in his usual clothes. There was a quality about him that suggested he had come from somewhere else entirely, something in the set of his jaw and the slight disarrangement of his jacket that she didn't see from him normally. "Doctor, CO told me," he said. "Is Gloria, she's stable." Nova's voice was flat. Not at him, just depleted. "She's going to be okay, this time." This time. He heard the weight in it. Her heart's been getting worse for 2 years. She looked at her coffee. "The bills are, I've been managing it, but the bills for this one are going to," she stopped, started again. "I'm sorry, you don't need to hear about my finances." She looked up. "Tell me," he said. "Taejun, I'm not asking to fix it." His voice was steady and genuine. "I'm asking because you're sitting here alone at 3 a.m. and you've clearly been alone with this for a very long time." He held her gaze. "Tell me," she told him. Not everything at once, not in perfect order, but the real shape of it, the dropped degree, the move to Seoul, the double shifts, the careful math of rent and Gloria's treatments and her own student loan that she was still paying off in small monthly installments. How she'd structured her entire life around what she could manage and had gotten quite good at it, and had been so focused on the managing that she'd stopped noticing what she'd had to put down to do it. He listened. All of it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't problem solve. He didn't look at her with the particular pity that she had learned to recognize and dread. He looked at her like she was remarkable. Not for her suffering, not that. Like she was remarkable for the fact that she'd carried all of this and still had something left over to give, still walked into a donor unit at 3 a.m. for a child she didn't know. "I want to help," he said when she finished. "Taejun, not because I owe you." His eyes were steady. "Because she's yours and he stopped. "Because I care about what happens to you." She looked at him for a long time. "Gloria has to agree," she said finally. "Of course. She's going to be suspicious. She's going to ask who you are. Tell her I'm the man whose daughter you saved. She's going to ask the other thing." A pause. "Then tell her that too." Nova exhaled. Something in her chest shifted, quiet and significant, like it had been held tight for a long time and had finally found somewhere safe to let go. "'Kay," she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She looked down at his hand over hers. She didn't move away. "Not alone anymore," he said, simply. She didn't say anything back, but she turned her hand over under his and held on. The threat arrived 5 weeks later without warning. It was the nature of Taejun's world that it was never entirely absent, the particular category of danger that came with being who he was. He had managed it with meticulous care, built separation between the parts of his life, protected the things that mattered behind layers that he had spent years and enormous resources creating. But Nova was not a secret. Not anymore. She had been seen with him too many times. At the small Mapogu restaurant. At Gloria's hospital. Walking through Uedo on a Sunday afternoon with their shoulders occasionally touching in the particular way of people who had stopped pretending they weren't drawn to each other. Someone had noticed. He found out through Lee, his driver and one of the few people in his organization who knew every layer of his life, at 6 in the morning. A message that was short and clear, and that sent something cold and absolute moving through Taejun's body. They know about the woman. They're watching the hospital. He read it once. Read it again. Then he called the person who ran his security operations, who answered on the first ring because his people answered on the first ring. Hospital, he said. 11th floor. The night shift tech. I need eyes on her. Now. Nova did not know anything was wrong until she arrived at the hospital at 11 and Lee was waiting in the lobby. She had never seen Lee in the hospital lobby. Mr. Kang asked me to bring you to him, Lee said. Polite, precise, nothing alarming in his tone and everything alarming in his presence here. Is Mina? Mina is fine. This is about something else. He'll explain. She went. Taejun was in the private family suite on the 8th floor. He was on the phone when she arrived, but ended the call the moment she walked in. The room was brighter than she'd expected. He looked at her the way she'd learned he looked at things he was trying to count and confirm, thoroughly, quickly, and with something underneath that was not professional. Not safe, he said. Right now, tonight. She looked at him. Explain. He did, concisely, without softening it into something easier to receive. The people who had reason to apply pressure to him. The fact that she had been identified. The fact that they would use whoever he cared about, and that she had become visible as someone he cared about, which was his doing, his failure to protect her adequately. And he was telling her this because she deserved to understand her situation and decide what she wanted to do about it. She was quiet for a moment. What happens now? She asked. Not going back to your apartment tonight. I'm posting people at the hospital. Your aunt's facility already has additional security as of 1 hour ago. I didn't tell you first because time mattered and I'll apologize for that properly later. He held her gaze. I need you to stay somewhere I can keep you safe until this is resolved. Resolved, she repeated. How? I'm handling it. Taejun, how? He looked at her. In the way I handle things, he said, which is permanently, she absorbed this. Nova. His voice changed. The control was still there, but something underneath it wasn't. I need you to be safe. Everything else, the ethics of it, the questions about what I am and what I do, I know you have them. I want to answer all of them. But right now, I need you to let me keep you safe. Please. She had never heard him say please before, not like that. Not stripped of everything else, she looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said. The next 72 hours were not quiet. She stayed in the 8th floor suite. He stayed in the building. The situation with the threat was handled in ways she was given the outline of and not the details, which she suspected was deliberate and which, for now, she accepted. He checked on her every few hours. Brought her food. Brought her the updated biochemistry textbook she'd been working through, which he must have sent someone to retrieve from her apartment, and which was such a specific and practical act of care that she sat with it in her hands for a while before opening it. On the second night, he stayed. Not in the way that required explanation, just, he didn't leave. He was on the phone for much of the evening, managing whatever was being managed, and she was reading, and somewhere around 2 in the morning the phone calls stopped and she looked up and he was just sitting there in the chair across from her, head back slightly, exhausted in a way she hadn't seen from him before. You should sleep, she said, later. Taejun. He opened his eyes, looked at her. She set the textbook aside and stood up and crossed the room, and she sat on the arm of the chair beside him, which was not where she had planned to end up but was apparently where she was, and he went completely still for a moment the way he went still when something caught him off guard and he hadn't yet decided what to do with it. She rested her head on his shoulder. Just that. He exhaled, slow and complete, like something letting go. His hand came up and settled at her waist, careful and deliberate, holding on without pulling. I'm sorry, he said quietly, that this happened, that you were in the middle of it. Knew who you were, she said. Not everything, but enough. You stayed. I stayed. She paused. I'm not sure I had a choice about that part. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. Nova. Her name again with that specific weight. Say anything complicated right now, she said softly. I'm tired. A pause. Then very quietly. Okay. She closed her eyes. Outside, Seoul was its nighttime self. Enormous and lit and moving, indifferent to small personal moments that happened in hospital suites on the 8th floor. She slept. He stayed awake beside her, watching the door. The threat was neutralized by the 3rd day. She didn't know the specifics. She knew that Taejun had made calls, and that the people he had made calls to had done whatever was necessary, and that Lee came to the door on the morning of the 4th day, and said one word, clear. And Taejun's shoulders dropped a centimeter, and he turned to her with something in his face that was the closest she had seen to relief looking like joy. She went back to her apartment that afternoon. He drove her himself, walked her upstairs, stood in her doorway looking at her small, well-organized space with the books and the box with the drawings and the photographs of Lagos that she'd pinned to the kitchen wall, and something in his expression did the thing she was starting to recognize, the quiet, private shift of someone updating their understanding of a person. Ask me something, she said. Whatever you're thinking. He looked at her. The textbooks under the bed, he said. The original ones. Why did you keep them? She hadn't expected that question. She thought about it honestly. Because I wasn't done, she said. Even when I thought I wasn't done. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. You weren't. 3 months later, Nova sat across from Taejun in his office at the Nexira Biotech headquarters. She had come to drop off documents related to the rare blood donor program he'd established through the hospital, a project she had quietly helped design over the course of 8 weeks of evening conversations and whiteboard sessions in his kitchen. He was reviewing something on his screen, and she was reviewing the program materials, and it was, she thought, quite an ordinary afternoon, except for the fact that being in the same room as him had stopped being ordinary to her a long time ago. She looked up and found him watching her. What? She said. Nothing. He closed his laptop. How's Gloria? Better. The new medication is working. She walked to the market yesterday, which she told me with the energy of someone reporting a military victory. He smiled, fully, genuinely, something she had been collecting without entirely admitting it since the first time she'd seen it. She approved of the security arrangements. She told me she doesn't need anyone protecting her, and also that the man Lee was very handsome. So I think she's fine. He laughed then, and it was low and real and did something to the room's atmosphere. She looked back at her papers. Nova. She looked up. He was standing now, which she hadn't noticed, and he was on her side of the desk, which she had also not noticed, which meant she had been distracted, which was unusual for her. He was close. Not good at building toward things, he said. I've been trying to do this carefully, at your pace, the way you needed it to go, you have. But I've also been wanting to say something for a while, and I keep finding the wrong moment, and I've decided there may not be a right one, so. She watched him. Love you, he said. Direct, clear, no performance. The way he said everything that was true. I have been, yes, for a while. I don't need you to say it back. I just needed you to know it wasn't a direction I was traveling toward. It's where I already am. She looked at him. This man who had built an empire and broken things and sat beside her in a hospital cafeteria at 3 a.m. without being asked. Who had put textbooks on her doorstep and coffee in cup holders and had stood in the rain watching her drive away. Who had looked at her in an elevator on the worst night of her career and finally actually seen her. Kang Taejun, she said. Yes, you're very bad at building toward things. A pause. I know. It took you 4 months. I was being careful. You were terrified. He didn't deny it. Yes, she stood up. She closed the distance between them herself because she had been the one holding it, and it was time to stop. She put her hand against his chest, felt his heartbeat under her palms, steady, faster than usual. I know, she said quietly. Me too. She looked up at him. And yes, he looked at her like she was something he hadn't known he was waiting for. Then his hands were at her face, careful and certain, and he kissed her, slow, intentional. The kind of kiss that didn't rush because it didn't need to. The kind that was a beginning and knew it was a beginning and wasn't afraid of what that meant. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing differently than before, she pressed her forehead against his collarbone and stayed there for a moment, and he wrapped his arms around her and held on in the specific, possessive, absolutely certain way that she had. She now admitted to herself, wanted him to hold her for a very long time. The donor program, she said after a while. We still have the 3rd section to review. She felt him laugh, his chest moving against her cheek. Later, he said. She stayed where she was. Later, she agreed, 4 years later. The graduation ceremony for the Yonsei University College of Medicine was held on a Thursday in May, under a sky that had decided, with the unhelpful timing of Korean spring, to be perfect. Nova walked across the stage in her gown, diploma in hand, name called out over the courtyard speakers. Nova Kane, pediatric medicine, and the sound of clapping that met her was not polite or perfunctory. In the 4th row, Gloria, In the seat she had been led to carefully by Lee because her heart was good now, but the terrain was uneven. Wearing the hat she'd brought from Itaewon and crying from the moment Nova's name was announced. One row back, Dr. Seo, who had written Nova's strongest recommendation letter, and had done so with the particular satisfaction of someone who had known for a long time that this was exactly where this story was going. And directly in the front, in the seat that had no particular significance except that Taejun had arrived first and had chosen it because it was central and unobstructed, and he would be able to see her face clearly when her name was called. Mina, now 12 years old, healthy and absolute and clutching a handmade sign that said Miss Night's Sky in letters that took up the entire surface, which she had refused to set down even when Taejun had gently suggested she was blocking the view for the people behind her. He sat beside her. He watched Nova's face when she walked across that stage. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, which was the way he had looked at her in the elevator on the worst night of her career. Finally, completely, without looking away. That evening, in the rooftop garden of the Kang building, with Seoul lit up below and string lights turning the air warm and Gloria installed in the best chair with tea and opinions, she was prepared to share at length. Taejun knelt. He was not a man who knelt easily. He had spent his entire adult life arranging the world so that he didn't have to, so that everything bent toward him rather than the reverse, and the people who knew him well understood this, and therefore understood the significance of what they were watching. He knelt in front of Nova, on the rooftop, with a ring that was simple and significant and chosen with the particular care he brought to everything that truly mattered, and he said, "I spent 2 years not seeing you," he said. Quiet without drama, looking up at her from the ground. "I don't want another day of that, not one." He held the ring up. "Be mine, officially, permanently. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you're never invisible to anyone again, but especially not to me." She was crying. She hadn't meant to. She almost never cried, and she had apparently used up her entire lifetime reserve in a single moment on a rooftop in Seoul. "Yes," she said. "Taejun, yes." He slid the ring on her finger. He stood. He held her face the way he always did, like something he'd been careful with for years, like something he intended to be careful with for the rest of his life. Behind them, Mina cheered with the unconstrained volume of a 12-year-old who had been waiting for this specific moment and was fully prepared to celebrate it at maximum capacity. Gloria said, loudly enough to be heard by everyone, "Finally! I've been waiting. Come, somebody bring me more tea." Nova laughed through the tears, her forehead against his, the ring warm on her finger, soul bright below them, everything they had carried and survived and chosen settling around them like something finally put down. "Love you," she said against his mouth. "I know," he said, then soft, "I love you more. You really can't help yourself." He kissed her. "I genuinely cannot." 7 months later, Nova sat in the kitchen of a home that was theirs. Not his, theirs, which was a distinction that had taken adjustment, and that she had come to find, in the daily living of it, to be the most ordinary and extraordinary thing she had ever chosen, with a test in her hand, and the particular quality of stillness that came from knowing something life-changing before you'd finished deciding how to feel about it. Taejun came in from the other room and stopped. He looked at her face. He understood immediately. He had always been good at reading her. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps. He sat down across from her at the table and took her hand in both of his, and he looked at her with those steady brown eyes that had first really seen her in an elevator at 4 in the morning when she was carrying cleaning supplies and running on no sleep. "Okay," he said, just that. "Okay," like a foundation. She looked at him. This man she had chosen and who had chosen her, and who was, she thought, going to be exactly as terrifyingly devoted to this new person as he was to every person he loved. "We're going to need a bigger apartment," she said. He smiled, full and immediate, that rare, genuine thing. "Call the architect tomorrow." She squeezed his hand. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning. Gloria was coming for lunch. Mina had already texted 7 times asking if she could babysit when the time came. The blood donor network Taejun had built through Hanseong had registered its 200th donor last week. A number Dr. Seo had sent them with 1 line of accompanying text. "Look what you started." Nova looked at the test in her hand. Looked at Taejun's face. She thought about what the world taught people to notice, power, and wealth, and the names that appeared at the top of things. She thought about an 8-year-old girl drawing a woman with tired eyes and a red heart, night after night, because she knew something that the rest of the world was still learning. The people truly holding lives together are the ones nobody thinks to see. She folded her fingers through his. They sat in the morning light, in their kitchen, in their life, this quiet, earned, extraordinary life. And for a while, neither of them said anything at all.